Podcast hosting is confusing, and I'm not talking about podcast hosts like Joe Rogan or somebody like that. I'm talking about podcast hosting services, companies like Buzzsprout, Spotify for Podcasters, Libsyn, Blueberry. These are services that help you get your podcast distributed out into the world and get on to directories like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, places like that where listeners listen to the show. And I was at Podcast Movement Evolutions here in Los Angeles yesterday, speaking with a couple people who were confused by what a podcast hosting service is and what it isn't. What it is an easier way for you to get an RSS feed, which is how your podcast gets up on these different directories like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And because podcasting is decentralized, unlike something like YouTube, you need a way to get your podcast out in the world. So these podcast hosting services make that easier. So when you upload your podcast, you're really going to your podcast hosting service. You upload your file there, that then gets distributed out into the world. Does that make sense?